it's so joyful to go to your bio and your resume. So let's start with some of the many shiny things. So on Broadway, original companies of Rent, Kiss the Spider Woman, Marie Christine, Dreamgirls, revivals of Gershwin's Fascinating Rhythm, Hair, Shuffle Along. And I just have to stop for a second and say, heartbreak of the year for me. Recently, the Public Theater's As You Like It, which was to be in the park this summer, and I'm just going to say it's delayed. Can I just say it's
let's say that it is delayed. It is delayed. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We haven't seen the end of As You Like It and all the gloriousness that is. You know.
Okay.
That's going to come.
Had to hear that. Children of Eden, a particular credit that just brings me great delight, which is the Alliance Theater's production of Jesus Christ Superstar Gospel. Of course. Concerts, Darius has headlined a few little places, Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, Kennedy Center, Disney Concert Hall, multiple recordings, television, Dietland, and one of the weirdest and most wonderful credits. And I loved watching this get dissected on Facebook. The voice of Shy Baldwin.
The singing
voice. The singing voice of Shy Baldwin. Yes. On Mrs. Maisel. So welcome. We're going to talk about a bunch of those. But when we were catching up just now, you mentioned your family, and you come from a dare I say musical dynasty, and I would love it if you would talk a little bit about your family and the people who got to float in and out of your life as you were coming up.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for having me. It is such a joy to be here with you, Susan, and I love you. I love the Alliance Theater, so thank you very, very much for having me. So yes, I did grow up in a musical family. My mother is a singer. My father is a jazz bassist, Eddie de Haas. My mother, Geraldine de Haas, formerly Geraldine Bay. And she, let me do my mother first. She sang with a trio comprised of my aunt, Salome, and my uncle, Andy Bay, Salome Bay, Geraldine Bay, called Andy and the Bay Sisters. And they sang as a trio, like professionally from like the late 50s to like the mid 60s. Interestingly, in that same period as The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel was taking place in. So, you know, there's a whole little, you know, sort of connection there. But they did that, and, you know, and then my mother married my father. My father is jazz bassist. He is what I would call your quintessential sideman. And he played with some of the greatest artists in jazz and in popular music as well. Among them, the legendary drummer Gene Krupa, Blossom Dearie. He has played with Chet Baker. He has played with Peter Paul and Mary. He was Peter Paul and Mary's bassist for a time. You can actually hear him playing bass with them on a recording called In the Wind. And they got married in the early 60s. My mother had my sister. They traveled around for a bit, and then my father got a gig in Chicago, and that's where I was born. In Chicago, and they set down roots there. My father was for a time a house musician at this place called the Holland, I believe it's called the Holland House, but that got prematurely ended. It prematurely ended, but he managed through connections or whatever just to be a working musician in Chicago and doing all that he had to do. My mother discovered theater. Primarily, I think, in Chicago, and she was in the Chicago, the National Company of Hair when it came to Chicago. So she was in that company with Joe Mantegna and Andre D. Shields. She was also part of a theater troupe, very popular, still very beloved in Chicago, called the Free Street Theater, which, brings theaters to all these communities, gives theaters to the community, literally, and she also appeared in the original companies, Chicago companies, I should say, of shows like Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope, and To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, back in the 70s when those shows were happening. So, I was exposed to that very, very early on. My aunt Salome was in the original company, Broadway company of Your Arms Too Short to Box with God. She was a very beloved muse, I would say, of Rado and Ragney, who wrote Hair. So they did a show. I don't know. Yeah, I think both of them wrote this show called Dude, and so there's a great album that you could get on eBay or whatever called Salome Bay Sings the Songs of Dude. Uh,
I'm writing that
along
down.
with Mel Carter and all these people. So I grew up so essentially, yes, I grew up and it had many cousins and relatives, all we're just all in it. So there was no way to escape it, really.
So it would have been an act of rebellion to become like a lawyer.
Yeah. I mean, even though that's what my parents wanted, they said, "Could you please be a lawyer? Could you please be a doctor?" Because the thing that a lot of parents ask their children who are artistically inclined,
Yeah.
But you grow up around it. So.
Yeah. So you have both played incredibly storied roles and you've originated roles. And for a second, I want to hear about the work and the responsibility when you originate a role. I was doing my Google homework, and you had a reading, I want to say in February, for a new musical, Complicated Lady. Was that in
A Complicated Woman?
Complicated Woman. So
yes.
when you're asked to originate a role, what's that? Talk about that process. Talk about the responsibility of that and the great latitude of that. What's it feel like?
Yeah, well, I try to get as many details as I can in my possession. And then in the case of, say, Complicated Woman, uh, uh, it was about John Kinley. And for those who may be familiar, John Kinley had the famed Kinley Players in Ohio. But he was this amazing, he was in the business, he was assistant, like head assistant to a major Broadway producer going back to the 30s, and I can't remember the name of the producer offhand. But he then eventually parlayed all that experience and his connections into bringing it back to his hometown of back in Ohio, and he was born. I guess what they would say back then, they called it hermaphrodite. But he was basically born with female parts, and it was just something that they just didn't know how to deal with back in his family, back growing up then. But it was something that he always knew, I am different, and I try to accept that. So this show, and the character I played was the boyfriend and eventual husband of John Kinley's best friend, who was also transgender. And and what was beautiful about it was, it had the style of the show was sort of like your kind of classic Broadway musical, like of the golden age, those musicals like a Guys and Dolls or whatever. Not that it was like Guys and Dolls, but sort of in that structure. But it had this modern sensibility. And in terms of the role that I played, I believe my character was fictional. However, in looking at how marginalized transgender people were at that time, and having to do what they had to do and, in order to survive. And it was put to me by the librettist, Ian Fields Stewart, a brilliant, brilliant artist, creator, who was also transgender. She said, "Well, this man loves this woman, and that is the basis of your he sees her, he loves her, he even when he is threatened by the fact that she may have to do what she had to do, because she basically had to turn tricks in order to survive. It you have to dig inside yourself to find what that understanding is. And that was hard for me. That was hard for me. And particularly because that particular part of it wasn't greatly explored in the piece. But I had to really dig into, well, what one would sacrifice in order to really be with the one that they love, and risk being shunned by society, risk being not being able to work where you work, because my character was a teacher, I believe. So it was just all those things. So just trying to put the history of what that is, and the time period, and the sensibility of that, and sort of having to just do, my mother and father were children in the 30s and 40s. My mother's born in 35. My father's born in 1930. So I tried to look at what families just had. When you're like, you're just coming out of the depression, there's a sort of a getting on with it sort of sensibility of that time for that generation, and not really wanting to talk about things. They didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so trying to honor that with also going, well, but what is that emotional life? What is that thing? So it's sort of an interesting balance.
So this piece is brand new, early development, and we as yet don't know what its trajectory is going to be. You've
Right.
also been in original companies of some shows that now are legendary. And I wonder, when you were in the original company of Rent, do I have that right?
Yes, I was hired for Rent. I was in the original. To clarify, I was in the original Broadway company.
Okay.
I was hired during the off-Broadway run, and hired knowing that they were transferring to Broadway.
So
Go ahead.
did you know what you were a part of?
By the time I was joining it, I had an inkling. I had auditioned for the off-Broadway company of Rent at the New York Theater Workshop, and I had just gotten back into the country from touring this Peter Sellers piece, and I was kind of sort of still recovering from that, and sort of reacclimating my life to being back in the States or whatever, and being called in for Rent was one of the first things I was called in for upon my return. And I auditioned for it, and I auditioned for Jonathan Larson, and it was Jonathan Larson, Michael Greif, and Tim Wilde, the musical director, and it's the three of them behind the table, and I had to learn I'll Cover You, and they wanted me to do the Act 2 version of it, where it was done more in a kind of a mournful, gospel-y way after Angel has passed away. And and I didn't know what it was. I just didn't know what it was. I didn't get it, because I was sent this demo tape of Jonathan Larson singing "I'll Cover You," just saying "Living my life." I was like, oh, this is nice. This is nice. Okay, all right. But then they wanted me to sing it sort of gospel-y, and I was like, okay, and I gave it my best shot, and all that stuff, and then I did my thing, and I didn't hear from them for weeks. And in in the interim, I had accepted another job out of the country. I don't know what it was about me going out of the country all that time, because I wanted to travel. I love to travel. So they said, well, we'd like to offer you a role in the ensemble of, and I was thinking, I'm getting ready to go away. I'm going out of the country, I wasn't thinking about, and so I turned it down. I turned it down, and people are all like, "Oh my God, he turned down Rent! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" But I was just like, But I did my thing. I taken a job. It took me to Morocco. I was in Morocco. Came back from Morocco. I got back. Jonathan Larson had passed away, and it was everywhere. It was all over the news. It was all in theater entertainment news. It was, and I was like, oh, this is the show that I auditioned for all those weeks ago. And Susan, for some reason, I just knew I was going to be part of it. At that moment, I was like, ooh, well, Darius, you kind of messed that up, but just sit tight. You're going to be part of it. Yeah, I can't say, maybe it was just I don't know what it was. But I knew, so I just sat and collected my unemployment and sat in my apartment and did little projects. And eventually Bernie Telsey did call and said, look, we know you don't want to understudy, which I didn't, because it's too hard. It's hard. I have great respect for understudies. It's so hard. But look, this show is getting ready to transfer to Broadway. It's finishing up its run at the New York Theater Workshop. We would just love for you to come back in, re-audition for them, And I was like, okay. I said, but let me see it first. Let me see it. And so they said, okay, we'll get you in. You can see and what. And I went to the New York Theater Workshop. They were, original cast came in on that New York Theater Workshop stage. And the moment that music started, I was like, okay, I got to do it. I got to do it.
So you knew what it was going to be.
Not at first when I was initially auditioning for it.
Eventually,
but
you came around.
And I don't know what that was. I don't know. Maybe it was just the ignorant bliss of youth. I don't know. I was like, I'm going to be part of this show. I think I'm going to be part of this show. And I just, and they called and I heard those first chords and da 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 da. I was just, all right. It was. I was like, and I ended up covering 6 roles.
So that was the Complicated Woman, Brand New, Who Knows, Rent, early trajectory. Flip that for us when you take on a role, and I have a particular one in mind. When you take on a role that maybe has been associated with some particular actors and has been embodied by many people, maybe one of them for 30 years or so. What happens when you step into that role? And I'm thinking about Superstar.
Okay. Well, specifically with Superstar, that was just such a divine thing all the way across the board. And I'll tell you, and I have to say thank you to you and to everybody who invited me to be part of that, because that, I still talk about that to this day as one of the seminal experiences of my theatrical career. And it was. And what made it so wonderful, and that kind of still sort of that kind of ignorant, blissful, I don't know what you call it, it was something that I wasn't even thinking about. People ask me, what are your dream roles? What are your, and I would say, oh, well, back when I was much younger, I was like, well, I want to be Judas in Jesus Christ Superstar because I loved Carl Anderson, and and I loved Ben Vereen, and I loved all those people. And I grew up with the movie. I loved the movie. I got to see Carl Anderson and Ted Neely from the movie do it live on stage in a national tour that they, because they took it out on national tour for years. And I saw them do it in Cincinnati because I was doing a show in Cincinnati. And on my day off, I went to see them. And they were with Sarita Wright as Mary. Sarita Wright, I don't know if anyone remembers Sarita Wright, who sang "Come Give Me Your Softness," da 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 da.
Yes.
Don't you know with you with Billy Preston. That was one of her big. And she was married to Stevie Wonder, and beautiful high crystalline voice, and she played Mary. Anyway, so what do I think? Well, in terms of that, because first of all, I never envisioned myself playing Jesus. I never, when that show came, and maybe because I, grew up with me and I identify with Carl Anderson on some level, and because he reminded me a little bit of a gentleman that my mother worked with years ago when she did the musical Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope, and who she also worked with in Free Street Theater, a wonderful singer by the name of Danny Beard. And I don't know that anyone would remember Danny Beard. I mean, he should be, because he was extraordinary. But he was also really big. As I think about a very big influence on me, because he was, this extraordinary singer, actor. He was in Dreamgirls, getting ready to take over the part of James Thunder Early, I think, back in the 80s. And then he sadly died in a fire. And so it was just really horrible. But I think about people from that period, and I wanted to emulate them. Basically, I wanted to emulate them and do all that. So I think when we came into Superstar, because I knew the show from a certain vantage point so well. Plus, I had done a very brief. I was a guest artist in a student production of Jesus Christ Superstar a couple of years before, I think, and I played Judas in that. So and I thought, well, that's what I thought. It was done, and it comes around again. Fabulous, Heaven on Our Minds. We used to be my audition song and all that. So when this came, I was like, oh, they want me to be Jesus? Okay. And I had to take the knowledge of what I had with the show, but then I had to kind of let it go, because what you all had created with the show, in bringing in each and every one of those fantastic artists who were all handpicked to be in the company of the show, it informed, honestly, it informed how I approached him. So I basically had a parameters within which I was working, and I said, well, maybe I can try this. And I would listen to Daryl Javon Williams, teaching them, and listen to and how Lewis wanted things attacked, and also the great trust that you all put in me. So I was like, okay, how can I bring this side? How do I bring my spirituality to it? How do I bring what struggles I may have had with spirituality, maybe with Christianity, with all of those? How do I distill that into this? And so it was a great learning thing. It was a lot of observation from everybody. Everybody contributed to what eventually came out of me, and I had to open up myself in a way that I probably hadn't done before. So every time we got to see my eyes, I can hardly see me stand like and them singing, and I remember Joe Nathan would kill me every performance, and I I literally had to respond. Or when Charles Wallace, would reach out to me as a leper, or and it just, and it would just put me in another place, which is like, okay, you know, I I had to let go of whatever preconceived notions I had of Jesus Christ, because what was beautiful about that coming is that a lot of people weren't, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of people weren't familiar with Jesus Christ Superstar.
No,
Not
and I,
not
and
not not the big core of the company,
right. And
right?
and I do remember when the gents came over, himself and himself,
Yes.
that Tim Rice was the one who commented that there was a complete lack of cynicism. And the
Hmm.
irony is that when they wrote it, they freely own this. They wrote it with a cynical view of
Yes.
how religion can lionize somebody and burn them down, and cult
Yes.
figures. And I remember Tim Rice saying, "There's no, I've I've never encountered it with zero cynicism. Everyone
Yes.
is in this, and audience and artists."
Yeah. Well, and that is the beautiful thing about art, and being able to take something that is so known and beloved and that people have such a specific idea of, and to basically, deconstruct it and mine it for all these beautiful clues. Because I remember you all bringing in all the biblical texts, and really having to mine through that and kind of go, okay, let's actually go there. Let's use what what everyone in this what they bring to this, so that it informs this material in a way that perhaps hadn't been explored before. Because Jesus Christ Superstar did come out of the very particular viewpoint, and that post civil rights era. I mean, it was created in London first, but then brought up to the
Yeah.
States. But so the sensibility that, sort of the hippie counterculture, having, being disillusioned, and it there was absolutely a very specific viewpoint that it brought. And so with this, there was a purity, an absolute purity, and I say, and a very non-judgmental purity that everyone brought, because they just brought their hearts and their love and just what they grew up with and what they knew of Jesus, and what the biblical teachings were, and the text, and so it was fascinating to literally be in the midst of that.
So
And
this is probably a super naive question, but hearing you talk about how you got to where you got to, I think of theater performers, the ones that you wait to work with again and again and again, are the ones who always tread at the intersection of well-honed, highly developed craft and deep, in this moment at this time, inquiry, right?
yes,
It's that the people who in every role collide those two are like manna from heaven, and you just want to work with them all the time.
sure.
So there's the idea of actors who sing and singers who act, and I think very naively and probably judgmentally often encounter singers in other mediums, in opera, in concert song, who I think of as predominantly in the craft place, right? In the technique, in the exquisite musical production place. But what you're describing, are you describing when you're at Birdland, when you're at Studio 54, Are both things going on? Is the investigation of the song from a psychological perspective every bit as present as the investigation of the song from a craft and
Yeah, yeah.
perspective?
I mean, I have to say, when I specifically, uh, and I always say I tried not to put aside one thing in order to do another thing, meaning I didn't leave my theater career to go do concerts, as I think sometimes is the perception. And that was the interesting, particularly with Jesus Christ Superstar, because that was after I had started doing concerts and had recordings and so trying to keep that balance of all those different worlds and sometimes feeling like, oh, I have to be in another head in order to and the thing is, yes, there are specific things that have to be tempered depending on what you're doing, but I always have come from the mindset of, had I not done uh, Marie Christine, had I not done Rent, had I not done uh, all those Shakespeare classes that I was horrible in high school. I was horrible. I never thought I was going to do Shakespeare. Never thought I was going to do Shakespeare because I thought I was horrible. I just wasn't getting it. I didn't start to get it until much later in life. I did the Bacchae, and I had a wonderful director who said, "Look, you can do this. If you can sing, you can do this." And so it sort of opened up a certain thing with me where I said, "Oh, you can apply this to everything." And in terms of, if you're in cabaret, I did a Bernstein show. I put together a Leonard Bernstein show for his centennial, and and I had redone arrangements of things, but I I certainly had to, Bernstein, like Sondheim, and in a very different way, but still, there are certain tenets that he lays out for you that even if you, like you say, if you um, break it down in a different way, um, you still are given a certain map, and
Yeah.
and I still, as an actor, follow that map. I mean, I discover things individually that are very unique to me, but I still follow the trajectory of it. So no, it's just tempered it's just tempered differently sometimes. But no, absolutely. I mean, it's why I love people like a Bernadette Peters or an Audra McDonald or uh, any of those wonderful, who perform in different mediums, because it doesn't, it doesn't take away from, everything informs. And what I had to realize for myself is that, I just had to have confidence in it. I would question myself about it a lot and go, oh, because I'm over here singing Stevie Wonder, now people just think I'm a singer, or some people just, because you occasionally have the people that say, oh, you really acted that. Yeah. I was like, thanks.
I think there's a compliment in there. Let me just get to it.
Right. Or sometimes someone would say, where do you land? There was a wonderful actress who came to me after a performance I had done at 54 Below, and she had said, this was wonderful, and you did, but where do you land? And I think about that, and I said, well, I really do try to honor the different aspects of, well, because I've had those times in my life and career where I said, oh, maybe I just need to stop this one because maybe I'm confusing people. Maybe I'm, but then I look at younger people today and in all the things that we have to, and in being in this time, this particular pandemic time where one has to bring, I mean, we're still in the midst of it, and we're going to be in the midst of it for a while, but thinking about how do we reinvent, or as I would like to say, expand on how we are going to convey what we do as theater artists.
Well, that tees up something that I just want to hear you talk about, because I know that it's going to come back around and we're all going to get to see it. But
yeah,
for folks who didn't get to see it first time around, new ways of conveying is a great way to talk about the public works program.
yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about your experience in As You Like It with the public?
Well, this is the funny thing, because when I was working on it, I will have to say, I thought of Jesus Christ Superstar Gospel a great deal while I was doing it. The tenets of it were so similar because, well, first of all, Public Works is extraordinary in that the public theater under the direction of Oscar Eustace, and this being a particular program that was started by Lear de Bessonet and all that, and you just want to give shout outs to them because it was the baby. They, it really is the quintessential definition of what the public theater is, in my estimation, because it really up the bar of what it means to bring theater to the public and saying that this is for everyone. And it's not only just for everyone to see, but it's for everyone to be a part of, to truly be a part of, to truly experience, to truly be in it, to truly be embraced and say, look, this is for you. This isn't something, say, oh, look at how wonderful we are. And, this is for you. And this, whatever experience you bring, and which is just as valid as me or someone who trained at Juilliard or whatever, and so the fact that they cultivated these relationships with all these different community partners and have kept that same relationship for a good number of years now. It was an extraordinary process to be thrown into. I mean, and I tell you, when when I did the workshop, they workshopped As You Like It at the public theater. We did it for like maybe a week or so with Shayna Taub and Lori Woolery, both extraordinary, just extraordinary. And just reading it through, and it was one of those things where I was like, and as you get older, you get a little less sure in a way, because remember when I was talking about with Ren's, like, I know I'm in part of this, and with this, I was like, I really want to be part of this. I really want to be part of this. It spoke to me on so many levels, and just where I was at in my life, and I felt like, oh, I can be what I am. I can be the age that I am. I still bring, my research and all that stuff, but I can really I don't have to play, younger, or, I can just be this Duke Senior. And, but I really wanted to be part of it. I really wanted to be part of it. And and I was afraid, oh, I'm going to, I had another show that I was doing out here in Bucks County, actually, that was going to conflict. But anyway, I did end up being part of it and being thrown into that. And all these people.
How big was the cast? What was the final body count on the cast?
Oh my God, I couldn't. It's at least 50 to 60 people.
Awesome.
At least. It was so many. I was gonna say 100. It felt like, And the thing was, this is what was cracking me up. With the whole Jesus Christ Superstar gospel thing. It's like, well, here I am, singing to the masses again, and having to, it was the same thing. It was just and lovely Dayron, who used to work, Dayron Miles.
Dayron Miles, yes.
Yeah, who used to work at the Alliance and now is,
running Dallas's public work. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was there, and I was like, Dayron, this is the same thing as Jesus Christ. He's like, I know, he's like great. I was like, and here I am singing to these big crowds again, and and it was just just heartrending, because you're given a stack of these photocopied of each community member. So they say, look, you don't have to learn everyone's name. We don't expect you to learn everyone's name because it's a lot of people. But, if you could just kind of look through it now, because you feel this responsibility. It's just like, oh my God, all these people, because they're all, they're looking at you and they see you on the bulletin board and you're Duke Senior. So everybody's like, hi, Duke Senior, and just having to give, and just, so you just want to be, you need to be present in a way that is more so than when you are doing a show with everyone who goes from show to show to show to show.
Right.
This was this was about really, really connecting on a very, this might sound a little, whatever, and I don't mean to sound kind of, in a very grassroots, very fundamental, and to the public theater's credit, a very consistent way, and I was very proud to be part of that experience, because it's like, I think, if Joseph Papp were to be looking over that and say, yeah, this is the logical next step of what it means to say that you are public theater.
This is what I meant.
Yeah, this is what I meant. And this is how you take this into the next millennium, the next whatever.
Yeah.
This more so than anything, and all of it is that, all the wonderful pieces that are developed at the public theater and in theaters across the country and around the world. But this was a movement that I felt was so neat, because it also took me back to what I was talking about when my mother was with the Free Street Theater in Chicago.
Right.
It's those same principles of being able to bring your truck to an open lot in a place, in a community that may not have the benefit of being able to see theater, and bringing it to them, and not only performing for them, but getting them to play with you.
That's right. So, letting everybody be part of the craft. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really extra. And here's the other thing. And and I know I'm biased. And the show is great. It's great. I mean, the score is great. It's great.
We're all going to get to see it in the park. I believe that to be true.
Yes.
Just different summer.
Oh, it's definite. It's a definite. Yeah.
I want to give folks. We have very little time left, because
I was talking too much.
No, because I just keep asking you questions, because I have so many things I want to hear you talk about. Yeah. And selfishly, I'm going to do one more. But okay. Folks on the call with us, put your hand up or go into chat if you have questions for Darius. Can you talk a little bit? You are on the International Board of Covenant House.
Yes.
And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that organization and what it means to you.
Well, it is just it's extraordinary, and Covenant House, for those who don't know, is the biggest agency, I should say, organization that attends to the needs of homeless youth throughout the country and in South America, in Guatemala, and a couple of the places uh, Mexico, and it is it's an extraordinary organization where uh, homeless youth, homelessness in this country is still so prevalent, and with homeless youth, it's even, I would dare say, even more of of a uh, of a problem, and Covenant House specifically works with youth roughly between the ages of 16 and 21. I would say a lot of these people who have aged out of the um, system, and have had horrible family situations, that just run the gamut, whether they are kicked out for being gay, or if there were drug problems, or if the family itself was homeless and they just couldn't take care of things across abuse,
Right.
in some cases child trafficking. So I have been on the board now, I think, for I'm not even sure, I think at least 6 years. But I worked with Covenant House prior to that, doing concerts for them. They're like Night of Broadway stars. But under the extraordinary leadership of Kevin Ryan, it has been a beacon in really trying to not only stamp out youth homelessness, but also being able to take all these young people in, and they turn away no one. They turn away no one. And considering in this time, that's really extraordinary. So they need as much help as they can possibly get. And you can go to www.covenanthouse.org. It is there. And it's just an extraordinary time that we're going through. So not only in trying to eradicate youth homelessness, but also being able to teach them skills in which to function in this world. A lot of these young people, didn't have the benefit of being able to learn how to use a checkbook or apply for a job properly, or all. So it's bringing all those skills into play, and just teaching, getting them, giving them some sort of uh, format, some sort of system within, which into work, so they can join society. And there have been people who have been residents of Covenant House who have gone on to great success, and so yeah, it's
I love that you do that. I love that you do that. So we had a question come in. How important is it, if at all, to let people know where you land as a performer, your friends, and is it important from a business perspective?
That's a very, very good question. How important is it to let people know where you land? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
I think I've had to learn over time that if I give too much of a multi-tiered answer to a question, if someone wants to know a specific thing, I was like, you know what? Let me, because I'm sensing this is what they want. So I think there are two ways to answer it, depending on what situation you're in. A lot of people know me as a theater, Broadway person. So I will play the, and that's, I've been fortunate in my career to do that. So I just speak to that. And if it warrants that, and I said, well, I also do concerts and recordings as well. But sometimes it's just that. And then if there is an opportunity, as in what we're having today, where I can speak to the different aspects of my career, then I answer in kind. But I find that sometimes you don't want to overwhelm the people. And plus, I'm fortunate in that people sometimes want to ask me very specific things. They'll ask about Lost in the Wilderness and Children of Eden, or they'll ask about The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, or they'll ask, so I can speak to that specific thing. I just try not to overwhelm to
Got it.
speak to a specific thing.
And I am also an artisanal cheese maker.
Yes.
We have a question here from Darius. Hey, Hershey, can you do the unmute? Darius, you're on.
Darius.
Hey, Darius, how's it going, man?
Hi, Darius. You better
Also-
rhyme with my name. Wow.
Also, hey, Miss Susan, nice to see you.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Darius, thank you for all the gems. I greatly appreciate it. One thing that I've been using quarantine as a very good time to continue to train and continue to work on things. But you touched on something a minute ago, and you kind of just touched on it then. But one thing that I have kind of struggled with lately is how to best market myself, kind of moving away from strictly being a singing actor. I would much rather be an actor that sings.
Okay.
I think for me, it's a little bit more complicated because I started out as a young kid acting, then I went into classical music and doing opera, and then I also do musical theater as well. So going between all the worlds, basically kind of the where do you land, where do you set up shop. And I've also had the pleasure of just finishing working with the Alliance on A Christmas Carol as an understudy. So that was a fun experience to learn from those actors. So really trying to market myself beyond this pandemic into something that'll kind of grow its own fruit at the end of the day.
So your question to me is, how do you
navigate when you're more so multi-dimensional to basically give someone a product that says, this is what I am at this current state?
Okay, well, I would say, you almost kind of answered your own question, because you said you wanted to move toward being an actor who happens to sing, but you want people to know you primarily as an actor. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I would say that's what you have to pour all your energy into. And it can be sort of a kind of a tricky navigation in that, nowadays, it's like, okay, well, what skills do you bring to the table? And depending on what is out there, you have to probably have a lot of things in your arsenal. But I would say, put yourself toward that. I mean, I know I have a lot of friends who did theater for years, and they said, you know what, I love the theater, but I want to concentrate specifically in film and TV. I mean, that's probably an age-old story, but but really, in terms of being able to have your reel and have all those monologues. I mean, I know a lot of people now are doing sort of like these monologue reels. My dear friend, I'll just call him out because he's about to have a birthday anyway, Reggie Talley, who I worked with not too long ago, wonderful actor, and he's about to have this film come out, and I wish I could remember the name of the film, but he did this monologue thing that I saw on Instagram. And that's what some people are doing. Susan and I were talking about before we went on air about, okay, doing these Zoom chats and everything. It's sort of an education for everyone of where to look in the camera, because this is what casting directors have been doing, for the past number of years. So my answer to you is really focus in on that specific thing. I would say experiment, put some dramatic monologues on camera, for yourself. And if there's something that you think, ooh, this really shows where I want to go, I would put it out there. You have this great world of social media in which to use as your oyster, and particularly now, and and sometimes it may just mean like, okay, I just feel like I'm spinning my wheels, but we're all kind of doing that. So that's what I would say. If that's what you specifically want to concentrate on, then really focus all the energy into that, because you'd be amazed, when you really spend concentrated time, and who can say when that thing happens where someone says, oh, let's get Jarius for that, but it may happen when you least expect it. That's my experience. So does that help?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jarius. I appreciate it, man.
You're welcome.
So we have one last one, because we're at time. What are you doing to have peace in your life in this particular moment? What gives you peace?
What gives me peace? I wake up almost every morning. Sometimes, me being the impatient personality I am, I say, I get up and gotta go. But I try to put into practice of waking up every morning and just say thank you for another day, and to express gratitude toward that. There's a lot of talk in in certain circles about expressing gratitude, and I concur with it, because I think there are some days where it's going to feel very bleak, it's going to feel monotonous, it's going to feel endless, where you're just not knowing what to do with yourself. And I think in those moments, and that's all valid. It's all valid, and I think it's important to get toward giving yourself peace, is to allow yourself to feel what you feel.
Mm.
Allow yourself to feel what you feel, and breathe through it. Just breathe. Be grateful for breath, because sadly there are a lot of people who that's the issue, like getting your breath. So be able to take that time to breathe and just sit. And there'll be days where you can say, I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that, I'm grateful. And there are other times where you're just like, and just to sit and give yourself peace. And then what personally gives me more a sense of peace, I actually do sing to myself every day, even if it's just a little something. But I mean, that's what gives me a sense of calm, and to be grateful to do that. Yeah.
So speaking of gratitude,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for giving us your time today.
Oh gosh, thank you. I feel like I talked a mile a minute.
That was the point, my friend. This is an opportunity for us to enlarge our circle of artistic colleagues, and
Yes.
I thank you for stepping into that circle. Wait, we got one last minute one. Let me make sure.
Oh, good.
Oh, it's a thank you. It's a thank you.
Oh.
So I'm all kinds of grateful to you for spending time with us, and for your willingness to lay your story and your craft out.
Oh goodness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you. It's truly, pleasure is really mine. So thank you. Thank you, Susan.
And folks on the call, thank you for spending your time with us, and be well. And as we now say in my household, every time we're saying goodbye, don't lick doorknobs.
Please don't.
Please don't lick doorknobs. That was your message for today. Be well.
Thank you. Very wise.
Thank you, Darius. Bye, all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Be well.